Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's conversation. I'm Allison DeFlorio, and I am so grateful to have one of my favorite people to have a conversation with as my co-host on today's webinar, Romaine Jones-Wise. And we'll talk a little bit more about who we are in just a moment. But I want to welcome all of you to the Art of Conversation. Have we forgotten how to talk to each other? And I have to share with you the evolution of this webinar. Ro is one of our senior consultants at Exude Human Capital, and both of us spend most of our days in conversation. As you might imagine, the conversations we've had in the 20 or so years that each of us has been in the field of human resources have changed, or perhaps the requirements around the conversation have changed quite a bit over the last 2 years with everything that's happened. And we have found ourselves, particularly over the last several months, just saying, you know, what is it about the workplace today? And what is it that people can be doing more of, less of, or differently to be able to communicate more effectively to one another? So that was the birth of this webinar today. And we hope to share with you a bit about what we've learned and what we share with our clients about how to improve communication skills, and most importantly, how to think about the art of the conversation. A couple of housekeeping tips before we get started. Your phones will all be on mute. However, we welcome your questions, and you can certainly put them in the question box or chat if you'd like us to address anything in particular, if you want to share something that you think will add to the conversation. We will be recording this webinar, so we will send a link out after the session, so please feel free to share that with anyone that you think may find it of value or who wasn't able to attend today. And lastly, you know, this is a conversation, so we welcome you to engage in the conversation with us. And if anyone wants to have a conversation for something we didn't address after this session, our contact information will appear at the end, and we're happy to talk with you then. So without further ado, let me just do some quick introductions for those of you that are familiar with Exude Human Capital. Welcome back. For those of you that are new, I'm Allison DeFlorio. I'm the co-founder and managing partner of the Human Capital, Exude Human Capital. And my experience as it relates to this conversation, I have over 20 years in more than I care to admit to, in the field of human resources and learning and development. And I've spent spend a great deal of my time working with leaders, managers, and all staff in helping improve communication in the workplace. And I'd like to turn it over to my colleague here, Romaine. Romaine, want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Romaine Jones-Wise, also known as Ro or Lettuce. I answer to both. I am a consultant with Exude, and I've been with the company for about a year, but my HR life spans almost 2 decades. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I am actively involved with our clients, facilitating trainings on effective communication, conflict resolution, change management, and my HR experience has transcended various industries, and I just have a heart and a passion for seeing people succeed and making sure relationships in the workplace remain healthy and thriving. So I am very excited to spend some time with you all this morning and looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. And some of what we're going to talk about today comes from one of our programs around communication. For those of you that know Exude, we have kind of 4 areas that we support our clients. We support them in employee benefits, human resources, leadership development, and diversity, equity, inclusion. And when I think about today's topic, it really incorporates human resources, inclusion, and leadership, right? So how do we embrace all of those and play at the intersection of how that can impact the conversations and hence the relationships we have with others. So without further ado, we're going to talk about the current state of communication in the workplace, what's changed, And why does it mean we have to focus on this a little bit differently? We're going to talk about trust and communication, and Ro's going to speak specifically to what trust is and how it can be built, broken, and rebuilt. And lastly, we're going to leave you with some tips and tools for improving communication in a hybrid, remote, or on-site workplace. So I would venture to guess that in our audience today, we probably have all three of these work styles here. So take from this what you can apply to your workplace. So let's talk about the current state of communication. So, prior to the pandemic, there was a belief, right or wrong, in many organizations that when you came to work, you kind of left everything at the door. Leave your bags at the door, you come to work, put on the happy face, and you are just expected to manage yourself accordingly. Well, what was happening before the pandemic and then what was accelerated as an impact of the pandemic was the blending of the lines between personal and professional until they're almost non-existent anymore. So we also have the trauma and the events over the last 2 years that have really impacted people's emotional state and how they come to the conversation. So some interesting statistics I wanted to share with you from a recent survey. 23% of participants in this recent survey, it was over 3,000 people, experience isolation and a lack of belonging in their work environment. Now, some of that may be due to working remotely. We have colleagues that I've never met in person that have been hired remotely since the pandemic. And we all know that some people work well remotely and some people need more connection than perhaps others. But it's a staggering statistic, and it gets into some mental health issues as well. We know that external factors have been highly charged. We have people experiencing PTSD from loss of loved ones, or illness of loved ones due to COVID, or their own impact with their own experience with COVID. It's a very highly charged political time. And Ro and I talk about this regularly. We have midterm elections coming up, so we can anticipate that the rhetoric and the highly charged conversations are going to kind of increase. And then we know there's been a tremendous amount of social unrest over the last two years, and important conversations, critical conversations are having to be had, but it does make some people uncomfortable. The other thing that I think was very interesting that was revealed in this survey was that 70% of managers, leaders believe that they're very efficient and effective and concise in communicating in hybrid and remote workplaces. However, 40% of staff believe that's the case. So that's a pretty significant number of people saying, no, communication isn't quite what it needs to be. And then the last piece that I think is extremely revealing and speaks to the emotional state of individuals, 53% of participants reported feeling overloaded, exhausted by the barrage of different types of communication that is taking place in the workplace and being able to keep up with it all. So you've got your email, your Teams, your Yammer, Google, whatever your organization uses, whatever your clients' organizations use that you now have to use. It's creating this sense of overload and exhaustion. So this is what's different about the conversations today. The people that you're having conversations with, your staff members, managers, leaders, are coming to the conversation from a different emotional place due to all of these factors that are impacting us today. So what's the impact on the employee experience? In many cases, in trying to keep up with this new remote hybrid work environment, communication has tended to be more one-sided than more of a conversation. So we have to get information out, in times of crisis change, get information out, but there's not always an opportunity for a feedback loop. So it appears to be one-sided communication. What happens when that's the case is there can be a breakdown of trust. And I say can be, it doesn't mean that nobody trusts managers or leaders, but there can be a breakdown of trust because in the absence of information, if people have questions or they want more information and they're not getting it, what do? They make it up. They make up their own. The other thing that we've seen an uptick in, and Ro will speak to this a little bit later, is inappropriate verbal and non-verbal communication. So, organizations where in the past, when you're in person with someone and you're reading their body language, you have other cues that you can take from them, you get a bigger picture. And sometimes you can say things, but the body language with you said it sends a different message. When it's in email or when it's when it's on video, perhaps it may not come across the same way, or your nonverbals may not be as natural or authentic, and it sends a different message. What's the result of this, or the outcome of all of this? Companies are reporting they spend 2.8 hours per week addressing conflict attributed to lack of communication. I think in the conversations Ro and I have, sometimes we feel that it's higher than 2.8 within some of the workplace situations, but 2.8 hours is a lot of time addressing conflict. Some organizations are reporting a loss of a connection as people, which can break down trust. So we always like to say at Exude, we think of employees as people first and employees second. So if there's a loss of connection as the people piece, that's a big piece of the trust factor. Email and written communication, the tone, the messaging may not always be received the way it was intended to be received. And then that can leave someone feeling very differently about a relationship for the course of the day. And then the multiple sources of ad hoc communication can be overwhelming. And again, we know organizations are trying to get information out quickly, but sometimes if it's coming in pieces and throughout the course of a week, it can be difficult for people to make sense of it. And what happens? People leave. So communication and trust have an enormous impact on someone's intent to stay in an organization. And we want to frame today's conversation with a quote from a fabulous book called Fierce Conversations by an author named Susan Scott, whose overarching theme is that the conversation is the relationship you have with someone. Think about that. She shares in her book that even though no single conversation may change or can change the trajectory of a relationship, work or personal, any single conversation can. The conversation is the relationship. So what we're going to talk about today is how do you prepare yourself? How do you prepare your managers? How do you to engage and to enter into a conversation with the purpose of preserving the relationship, even if you have to have a conversation about something difficult, something exciting, something happy, something sad. The conversation you have around that is the relationship you have with someone. So I would love to turn it over to Ro. And Ro, I so value your stories and the experiences you have in working with our clients to speak a bit about what is trust and how does it impact communication.
Thank you so much, Allison. So I just received word, and I just wanted to pause here for a second. The chat function seems to be disabled. So if you have questions, please make sure you put them in the question and answer function, and we'll be able to see those. We just wanted to put that messaging out there. So if you're having challenging using the chat function and you have a comment or question, please make sure you use the question and answer function, and we'll be able to see your questions and responses. So what does trust look like? This is the quintessential foundational building block of relationships in the workplace. Trust is like almost a monetary commodity. It has such a great value in how we engage with one another. From the screen, you'll see that trust, the absence of trust compared to the presence of trust can have a dramatic impact on what our work teams look like, what our manager to direct report relationships look like. Think about an experience you have in the workplace. When trust is present, you're more open to share information and engage and feel safe in making a mistake because it's not going to be, you're not going to be berated about it and beat over the head. When trust is absent, the impact is very visible. You have team members who will not share information. People will hoard their knowledge. They're not engaging. There's a heightened level of stress and anxiety. People seem to think that individuals may be out for them, or they're having conversations about them behind their backs. I think we've all been in settings where there's a lot of passive aggressive energy in terms of team meetings or cross team collaborations, where people are not saying anything, but you're getting different vibes and nonverbal communications. And a lot of that comes from trust. People are defensive when trust is absent. So they're guarding themselves. They're not open. They're not receptive. How this manifests is that we'll see, lower morale, a lot of people avoiding communication altogether. That could be from a work standpoint. That could be from all of the trauma that we've all experienced. If employees do not feel that they have the trust within their leadership, they're not going to come and report inappropriate conduct in the workplace. They're less likely to express the concerns that they're having. Some people will avoid conversation altogether and instead leave an organization. So you'll see a mass exodus of people who just don't feel comfortable having the conversations. In recent experience, I had an engagement with a client, and there seemed to be a full communication breakdown. And when we finally sat and I was able to help mediate that conversation, we got to the bottom of the fact that the way the manager was asking questions and requesting information was so overwhelming to the employee that they would just completely shut down and avoid responding altogether. Not that the employee wasn't doing the work, but that the employee did not feel comfortable with responses or asking questions to clarify the expectations of the leaders. And it caused turmoil on the work team in a way that we literally had to regroup, rebuild, and start to refunction the trust in a way. When you have trust, there's two-way conversation, there's feedback, and the communication flows so much better. And all of this uncertainty that's happening around us right now, trust is the foundation to building and rebuilding relationships. People need to know that they can come to work, be their authentic self, and trust their leaders and their colleagues with what their experience is. In the past, and I don't know about anyone on the call, but I've worked in places where I felt like I had to mask who I was, what I was experiencing, because I was taught at a very early age that you leave all of your external stuff out of the workplace. But I'm happy to report in my current work environment that if I am having an off day, or if I am feeling unsettled about something in the workplace, I have the relationship with my managers and colleagues that I can go and have that conversation. So what happens is we have less conflict in the workplace because we're able to have the dialogue and the communication and really openly share about what the experience is. When the lack of trust is present, it's really going to, have the rumor mills spreading. It's going to increase the employee conflict and the manager conflict. Employee engagement is going to significantly decline. And a lot of times when people feel that they can't voice their concerns or issues to leadership, they will go through a third party or begin to engage a third party to start to have those conversations for them. So trust and communication is kind of keeps the dialogue flowing back and forth, and it allows people to reformat and refocus their experience within the workplace. The challenge becomes, if I don't know you have an issue in the workplace, I can't help you fix it. But you have to trust me enough to be able to engage with me to let me know what your true experience is. So,
Ro, if I could just add something
sure.
there, and that last point that you made about organizing, that is one of the things we've seen an uptick in, is people feeling as though I can't trust my leader, my manager. So who can I go to trust? And in today's environment, where there is so much uncertainty, and we know that I may say one thing today and that information is going to change tomorrow. I have my team has to be able to trust me that I will share updated information with them as I receive it. So they may not trust the information, but they have to trust that I will give them, or you're, as the leader, you will give them the most updated information. And I think that's a big shift in communication from the way we used to communicate, or the way leaders were taught to communicate prior to the pandemic. It's like, let's have all our information together before we communicate out. We're in a different environment now, so we have to communicate what we know. Something else that struck me when you gave that example, Ro, about the conversation with a manager and the employee not feeling heard, how much of that was communication style differences? Because I know in our work we talk about this a lot, that the way we communicate can really impact the conversation.
You're absolutely right. A lot of it was the communication style that it was presented. The leader was very much an action-oriented leader and was trying to give directives without giving detail of how they wanted the work done. And the employee was looking for instruction. And the autonomy that the manager thought they were given was a little destructured for them. It wasn't enough information for the person to feel that they could do the job effectively, because they were fearful of misstepping or making a mistake, unsure of what the expectation was from the leader. So it was a matter of kind of regrouping and finding the language that kind of met the need for the conversation. So it goes into this topic that we have up on the screen, communication styles. Everyone has a preferred communication style, and 9 times out of 10, we communicate, or we want to be communicated to, the way we communicate to other people. And that's not always the case. So there are 4 various styles, and this is my absolute favorite class to facilitate with Exude, is the true colors of communication. And it depicts the 4 primary communication styles, and you'll see them listed here. So the red individuals are our action-oriented people. They are the go-getters. They're going to put things into action. They want to go right away. They may not ask a lot of questions. If you tell them this is the goal, then guess what? That's it. We're going to start a new program. We're going to open up a new center. We're going to expand business. Okay, ready, set, go. The yellows are our more process-driven people. How are we going to do this? What are the steps we need to follow? What are the challenges that we need to face? What do we need to consider? So the yellows are more process-focused, and they're going to ask a lot of questions. So as you can imagine, if you have someone that's ready, set, go, ready to be very action-oriented, not worrying about how we're going to get it done, just wanting to get it done, you can see where some conflict may arise. If you're trying to put someone who's a red dominant and a yellow dominant together in a working team. The challenge becomes understanding the differences and the strengths of both sides. To everyone's point on the call, I am a prominent blue person. Blue is the harmony person. I am always considering the who and the impact that it has on people. I know this to be a strength, but it can also be a blind spot for me, because I am very reluctant to move quickly sometimes, because I'm always considering the people impact, and I'm overthinking sometimes some things that need to happen to ensure people align with what the task is and what steps we need to take. The green individuals are our data folks. These are the whys. Why are we doing this? What does the data say? What are we quantifying? Is there a business case for this? So there's a lot of question and being skeptical in that regard. But the beauty of all of this is, if you incorporate all 4 of these colors into your work teams, it's amazing what you can accomplish, because you counterbalance each other. Now, the great thing about individuals is we all have all 4 traits within us. We just have a more dominant trait of one color over another. But the key to communicating is, how do I connect? If I'm a blue person who's all about harmony and making sure, people are considered, how do I engage with someone who's very action oriented and wants to drive change and make things happen and is not really worried about process? The great thing about the color palette, as we call it, is that it creates a masterpiece when you put all four colors together. It's amazing what we can accomplish when we know how to complement each other in these different communication styles. If I'm leading a team and I know I need my reds to really be focused on pushing us to deliverables and getting things accomplished, I need to make sure my communication style resonates with them. But I also have to consider how I'm engaging my yellows that need to understand the how and the process and the steps that are involved, and engage and answer any questions that they may have. So I've learned from teaching this course and engaging with clients and how we leverage communication in a way that speaks to everyone, so that when you send out that initial communication, you're capturing the reds with a subject line that says action required or request required or response needed, because they know they have to do something. In the body of the email, you're addressing all of the steps that need to happen in a bulleted format, so that your yellows know what steps they need to take and what the process is. And in your overview of whatever the engagement or the project is, you're giving the why. Why are we doing this? What is the reason behind it? What does the data show? And then, of course, the people component of who's involved, how they're going to interact, and what the individual contribution looks like. So the understanding the communication styles and the traits of those people that have that dominant color is very important. And I'll point out to you that 40% of the population is either 40% is red or yellow, and 15% of the population is blue, and only 5% of the population is green. So when you consider that, it's really about, engaging everybody to make sure that they have the questions answered that they need and communicating effectively. And again, once we put all of those pieces together, the conversation really becomes a masterpiece, because everybody has what they need to step away from that conversation with the data and information that works best for them.
Ro, one of the things I've heard you say when we've talked about this, or I've watched you deliver this program, is that for self-awareness, which is a big piece of communication, right? If you leave a conversation, or you're entering a conversation and you're feeling very stressed about it, step back and say, what was it about that conversation that made me feel stressed? So for instance, let's say you are a blue, or you're a red, and the person delivering the person you're having a conversation with is very deep into process, or yellow, which you can do, but it's not your dominant style. That can create stress. And somehow to understand what is it about that conversation that's making me feel stressed, and step back and say, okay, it's not what we're talking about, it's how we're talking about it, is a bit of a stress reliever.
It is.
Do you find that in your work with your teams?
Yes. It's really understanding the audience and understanding how I show up to conversations. So if I'm coming back into a conversation that we may have had multiple times, a point of frustration for me can be, why are we talking about this again? And then I have to self-regulate and be aware of my level of frustration. Sometimes it's go, okay, no, there might be some new information. There may be a new outcome. There may be something that we need to adjust and modify. But I take that time to step back and just kind of refocus. And then I'm able to understand the trigger that I have that may make me show up to the conversation not as my best self. because sometimes when we are heightened by emotion and we're engaging with other people, the triggers of having to respond to questions that we may not have answers to or not have data points for can heighten people's anxieties and sometimes put them on the defensive. And that can make the conversations a little emotionally charged. And that's not necessarily a healthy way to manage a team. So taking that moment to self-regulate and really understand past experience and how I show up is very important. And it's something that I encourage leaders to do before they engage in any type of communication, be it around work, be it around performance, be it around conflict resolution. It's really taking that moment to self-regulate and understand how my previous experience may make me show up in my current situation. So just being, inept with my self-awareness and understanding my emotional levels is very crucial, very crucial.
I remember being in a meeting with a leadership team that had gone through this process once. And one of the ways that they implemented it into their conversations was to preface something they were going to say if they felt as though it may have an impact on others. And what I mean by that is I remember one individual saying, okay, this is going to sound a little bit blue of me, but bear with me here. And it was interesting because the way it framed, you just saw everybody kind of just take a, okay, okay, she's a blue and that's what she's going to do. And you could apply that same technique before you begin a conversation. I see it with green. Sometimes people say, why? They're asking why so many times. Well, step back and say, perhaps we haven't given them the data they need to make the decision that they're trying to make or to give the judgment or the opinion that they're trying to give. So I guess the message here, conversation really is an art, and we have to understand our own preferences as well as those of others and know when to alter our own style to improve the conversation with someone else.
And another key takeaway is when employees come to a leader and they're trying to convey an experience or talk about or offer some feedback, if the leader is very action oriented, they're going to look to try to just fix the problem. But that sometimes can be very dismissive to someone trying to share their experience. If you're like, okay, well, we'll fix it, we'll resolve it. It's almost like you're trying to shut them up and get them to move past it, where someone like a blue like myself wants to really be able to articulate that to give you why I'm feeling that, because there's reasoning behind it. So it might not necessarily be my own personal experience, but I've seen this countless times with client engagements where employees just want to be heard. And sometimes leaders in, senior positions a lot of times are very red focused because they're very action oriented. They're very get it done. Sometimes they can come across that they're not hearing or taking the time to connect with team members, which is also an impact of trust, because if I feel like you're dismissing me, I'm less likely to come back to you and have conversation in the future.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating. Thanks for giving us the Reader's Digest overview of
the Reader's Digest. Yeah. True colors of communication.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about tips and tools for improving trust and communication in the workplace. And I'd love to hear some of the things that you've shared with your clients, because I think there's some really interesting tools in here.
Yes. I think the most instrumental way to build and rebuild trust is to kind of focus on two areas. It's really focusing on the personal trust and the operational trust. And trust is such a vital part. When we lose it, we don't understand how valuable it is. But to rebuild it, we want to take the time to address these two options, these two areas. So personal trust is really people focused. This is how we rebuild the confidence that someone on my team has my back. My manager, my leader is understanding of me. They see me. They appreciate the authentic me, and they're giving me the opportunity and the safety to make a mistake without being penalized. A great tool to use to help rebuild trust is doing 2x2 feedback. If you're familiar with this, this is where you have engagements, be it peer-to-peer or peer-to-manager, and you offer two things that you're doing well, and two things that your colleague or your manager is doing well, and then two things that you can improve upon or develop, or two things that your manager or colleague can improve upon. This way, we're having conversation, we're creating dialogue, we're opening up we're opening up the feedback to ensure that everyone is having a sense of being heard, and that what is perceived to be a mistrust or a break in trust could be a breakdown in communication. And rebuilding that is really going to afford us an opportunity to connect one another and give our experience. From an operational standpoint, this is more task focused. This is making sure the work that is being requested is done. This has been a very dominant thing in the hybrid remote environment, because managers are like, how do I make sure my team is doing the work they say they're doing? How can I ensure without micromanaging? How can I trust my team to do what I ask them to do? Great way to build operational trust is to hold people accountable to assignments. The thing that I've noticed is if you promise and you are giving someone information that they need to do their job, you can really continue that level of trust by making sure that line of communication is always open. If I promise Allison something that she needs to give for a report for a client, and I am not able to deliver as promised, it's okay. But I have to communicate that to Allison and say, hey, I ran into a roadblock. I'm not going to have the information for you by this time. Here's what I can do to get it to you. And, let me know that works. It shouldn't be Allison reaching out to me and say, hey, Ro, do you have that information? I need to follow up with the client. It's really about giving confidence that the work is going to be done when expected. And if it's not going to be done that way, communicating that. A great tool to leverage with operational trust are 15 fives. 15 fives is kind of the check-in tool that a lot of leaders do with their team. A 15-5 is a recap of work priorities, current projects, things that individuals are working on. It gives a status report of how you are making out with certain goals and aspects or projects, and then the priorities that you have set for the next week. The timing is fluid. If you want to do it weekly, bi-weekly, however you see fit. The name 15-5 derives from, it should take you about 15 minutes as an employee to document this information. It should take your leader about 5 minutes to read it. But the communication that you're sharing on these check-ins is going to be so important, because as a leader, then you can go in and help your employee reprioritize what's important, ensure things are being accomplished, making sure they have the support that they need and the resources they need to do the work. So the operational trust is making sure the work gets done. The personal trust is making sure that there's a level of integrity and accountability and trust amongst colleagues and leaders.
And it does sound like baked into this in order to conduct these, particularly the 2x2s, the way that you describe them, there has to be a degree of emotional intelligence.
Most definitely. Most definitely, yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you see that impacting communication and trust.
Emotional intelligence is the way that we look at our intrinsic motivations, how we become self-aware. We look at how our engagement impacts other people, and it manifests in understanding how we make decisions, we solve problems, and we communicate with one another. Emotional intelligence is the thing that allows us to be understanding of one another. If we're not tapping into our EQ, as I like to call it, we're missing the opportunity to build the relationships, to maintain the relationships. Emotional intelligence is something that equips us to be the best leader possible. There are ways that we can work to improve our emotional intelligence by way of managing our self-awareness. There's a formula for success that we leverage called emotional intelligence and empathy. How you improve your emotional intelligence in the workplace is you increase your self-awareness. You understand how you show up. You know your communication style. You know your emotional triggers. You know how things impact you based on your own personal experience. But the great thing is, once we're self-aware, we're able to self-regulate, meaning I know that I may need to take a couple of deep breaths before I go into certain conversations to ensure I'm showing up as my best self, understanding that the energy that I'm giving off is contagious in certain environments, and it may add fuel to an already tense situation. Interpersonal skills is about the relationship building. It's about the conversation. It's about saying things that are appropriate, things that are not defensive to colleagues in the workplace. Improving interpersonal skills right now is where I see the most need with my client engagements. People have literally forgot how to speak to one another. They're being accusatory. They're calling people out of name. They're saying things that are hurtful. They're making comments that are inappropriate in the workplace. So improving the interpersonal skills goes not only to the one-on-one conversations, but how we engage with our total teams. Am I giving off what is expected? A lot of times I've seen in clients, and it's people coming complaining to leaders that such and such, is not speaking to me appropriately. They're teasing me, they're harassing me, they're bullying me. A lot of this comes in the way that we're engaging with each other right now in the workplace. And a lot of times managers are unsure of how to handle that. And we want to make sure that when we go into those conversations to mediate and try to resolve the conflict with employees that are having a peer-to-peer conflict, that we're taking the time to be self-reflective, self-aware, so that we're giving everyone a voice in the conversation and practice being mindful of what the experiences are for the individuals involved. A lot of times we don't take into consideration that things affect other people differently. Empathy is where we can connect with one another. A lot of times leaders who may not be experiencing the same outcome as another employee can't empathize with them. In the wake of all of the things that have transpired, there's a lot of social unrest. There's a lot of violence going on. A lot of people are nervous. So when we really take into account what people are experiencing just trying to get to work, or even going to the grocery store, or even stepping outside of their house, there's a lot of empathy that we need to give people a time to articulate that and share what their experience is. The last
I'm so sorry. I just want to
Sure.
interject something there, because I think you hit on something really important. And I believe many managers believe that they're good that they practice empathy. That is a big shift from how managers were trained to communicate pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And I think it's helpful just to state, and many of you on the line may already know this, but empathy is identifying, the facts of what you hear, but the emotion with which it's said. So if Rose shares something with me and about, I don't know, her experience getting to work that day, to say, Ro, it sounds like the morning was an incredibly frustrating process and that you had to go through a lot just to get here today. Those words have to come out of your mouth, not just be thinking about it, but that's how you actually demonstrate empathy in a conversation. And it's interesting because some people think it, but to show that you truly have empathy, you have to be able to say those words, the emotion that someone's feeling. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, you know, there are certain emotions that might come out in a conversation in the workplace that maybe you don't you think about the word you're going to use to describe it. So for instance, if somebody's very upset about something and you say, well, you seem very angry about that, that could be a trigger word, but right. It sounds like, you know, that this is something that means a lot to you and that you're extremely frustrated or you're extremely disappointed in something. That may be a way to acknowledge what the person is saying. And they might turn around and just say to you, no, I'm actually angry, but it's their word, right?
It's their word, right. We're not forcing it on them.
Yeah,
absolutely right.
And until you identify the emotion, people really can't hear what you're going to say. So if you are having a conversation about workplace conflict or disagreements or performance, even where somebody disagrees with how you're addressing a performance issue, just be mindful that there's emotion that's behind that, and you have to practice empathy.
Indeed. And your wordsmithing is very important. You know, certain words are triggers. If you use angry and aggressive, sometimes that can really escalate a conversation in a negative way and not be productive. So we want to be mindful. They say name it and tame it. That's what they say with emotions. You want to name the emotion and tame it. So just being emotionally aware of what's happening and being able to give voice to that, so that way it can be addressed based on the actual response, not the perceived response. A lot of times we get hung up in communication because we're perceiving things one way, and that's not what the actual experience is. So really being able to ask the questions and afford opportunity to give the response that will help navigate that conversation.
Great.
Most definitely.
Just the different types of methods. I mean, what's the right one to use?
The answer to that question is all of the above. There are preferred methods for certain engagements. So if you're asking a quick yes, no question, sometimes it's easier just to send a text message. It doesn't have to be a scheduled Zoom call to ask one question. It's literally just, hey, do you know where this file is? And you respond. Easy and done. Email is when we want to give instructions. We want to set tone, or we want to follow up to a conversation to ensure that everybody has the same level of understanding and accountability. Phone calls are my favorite. I absolutely adore phone calls. This is when we're asking multiple questions. I don't know if anyone on the call, and I think we've all been there. We go back and forth on an email thread all day. Asking questions back and forth, and you go and you now have like a 7-page document of back and forth when we could have just hopped on the phone, had a conversation. So phones are good if you have multiple questions, you need some direct feedback, you want to collaborate on ideas, and just kind of hop on the phone to get things resolved versus having to go back and forth on email or text message or Slack or Teams. And then phone also gives us the time saver of connecting with individuals who may be in different time zones, who may have other obligations, and we can hop on the call for like a 5-minute call versus having to wait 5 hours for an email response. So phone calls definitely are helpful. And then face-to-face communication. This is where it's vital when we're working on that area of building and rebuilding trust. Seeing someone is going to be very important because you're going to be able to read verbal and nonverbal cues from someone when you're able to see them. So anytime that we're looking to resolve conflict, hash out performance evaluations, talk about relationship building or team building. We want to do that in a face-to-face setting, meaning on camera if we're virtual, or in person if we are on the same work site. We want to make sure we have that connection. So the four recommended communication methods are here and designed to give us all the tools that we need. It's just using them appropriately within the confines of our workspace and our work teams.
I would also say many of the leaders that we work with at a minimum, in remote engagements, will have a face-to-face video, face-to-face, at least once a week with those they lead. And it's important because you can, without seeing the body language, you may not always get a full read on the person. So be sure to build that into whatever communication plan you have as a manager or leader, which leads us into this next piece, is really to be an effective communicator, which I think Ro, you and I agree, it is the most critical core competency for any manager today.
Agreed.
Is able to be an effective communicator. And it takes work. It really does take work. But you have to be able to plan for communication. And what we mean by that is when you have something you want to share, ask yourself some simple questions. How important is this? Not to me. I mean, it's important to me, but how important is this going to be to those that I work with, right? How urgent is it? When do we need this information to go out? When do people need this information in order to do their job, or in order to have what they need to run with it? Who needs the information? And I think being intentional, particularly in remote hybrid environments, but even in the workplace, in face-to-face workplace, how do we ensure that everybody who needs this information is getting this? And there are those who may need it directly. There's those who may need to be informed, but they don't need it. They just need to know that it's happening. And then, very importantly, who am I communicating to? And what questions do I need to answer in my communication to better engage? And this goes back to those communication styles. You know, I may be a blue or a green, and let's use green because we haven't talked about it as much. It's only 5% of the population. Unless you're in biotech or technology, then in my experience, you see higher levels of green. But you might get too into the data and not include some of the other pieces. So by really thinking about that and ensuring you're answering the questions, why, what, who, when, how, even if the how is, we're not sure of all the steps yet, but we commit to getting those to you within a week, then you're satisfying the yellow style for need to know the process. Mm-hmm. Remember considerations, multiple communication methods. It's not a one, you can't just send an email and say, okay, I've done my job communicating. It's a little bit more involved these days. You really have to put effort into it. I think multi-generational workforce also impacts how we communicate. You know, you have people entering the workforce that have communicated via text or short messaging their entire lives. And then you have other people that are more used to face-to-face conversation. So there's no one right or wrong. It's kind of and. So how do we pull these together and make sure that we're pulling everybody in a manner that makes sense? I think, just to reiterate what Ro was talking about with personal and operational trust, being intentional about building personal and operational trust. And here's an ask to all of you, or something you can try at the end of every day on your way home, and whether home means walking into the kitchen from your home office, you know, say to yourself, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well did I demonstrate personal trust with my employees or my peers or my leader? How well did I demonstrate operational trust? And be honest with yourself. You know, I was a 7 today. I was a 7 because I probably didn't give Ro time to ask questions on that really important communication. So tomorrow, I'm going to focus on making sure that I give everybody the opportunity to ask more questions the next time I share information. Layering communication, not a one-size-fits-all, right? So you might send out an email, have a call for questions, follow up with a phone call for people who may not share questions in a group setting. You know your teams and you know what's going to work well for them, or you'll learn your teams. Timing is another thing. And Ro and I have talked about this often. You know, the timing of when you share communication matters. And sometimes it's not as impactful as others. But if you're going to send an email out, you know, at 5:05 on a Friday, just know that whatever's in that email, people are going to be thinking about all weekend.
All weekend, yes.
So, and if they're blues, they're going to be thinking about it for months, right? So you want to make sure that your timing is such that not too much time goes by before someone has an opportunity to ask questions or someone to talk to. So as we move into our final few minutes of this, we just want to take a couple takeaways for you. And we hope that this has been helpful. But, you know, establish some guidelines for intentional check-ins with people. Think about the 2 tools that Rose shared, and she's happy to follow. If you have questions, you can reach out to her or myself, and we're happy to walk you through it. The 15 5s and the 2x2s. These can then become part of the communication process within your organization. Please, please, please be aware of your own communication style and others. When you find that you can really communicate easily with one person, chances are you share a preferred style with them. But it's important that you recognize when you need to alter your own style to improve communication with others and to have a better conversation. Think about communication at all phases of the employee life cycle, right? So what kind of communication and the frequency and the timing and of new hires, or during the onboarding process, that critical process of 90 days to 6 months of getting someone acclimated to your organization. Performance management, the whole year, what's that intentional communication around performance look like? And even offboarding, how do you have that those conversations in a way that helps somebody exit the organization in a way that feels good, or that's aligned to your culture, I should say. Think about being intentional about communication and how you're going to communicate at the outset of projects. Remember, styles matter. You might have all 4 styles on a project plan, on a project team. Have an intentional conversation about what's going to be important to us. Do we want to have weekly video check-ins and then bi-weekly video email follow-up?
Email check-ins.
Yeah, email check-ins. What's going to resonate with everybody so they feel like they're getting the information they need to be a valuable contributor to the project? Can't emphasize this enough. Train managers on communicating with empathy. Just has to be done, and have them practice it, because that's going to be the difference between them building trust and not being able to build trust. And then remember, trust gets broken intentionally or unintentionally. There are going to be times where there is an operational failure, or I forget to do something that Ro asked me to do, or one of my other colleagues asked me to do. And we have to then take ownership for it, apologize, and take the steps to ensure that it doesn't happen again. But it's this constant process of building and rebuilding trust to be successful in the workplace. And lastly, we want to leave you with something that one of our colleagues, or actually our director of well-being, Carla Chin, says frequently. You know, you are responsible for the energy you bring to this space, is what she says. And we're just changing it to say, the energy you bring to the conversation. If I want to have a meaningful, heartfelt, but direct, important conversation, then the energy I bring to that conversation has to invite Ro, if she's the person I'm having it with, to do the same. And I own my energy in that conversation, and I own my responses. So the work world is just one big series of conversations. And we hope that this one leaves you with a few things to think about or to share with your team members in the conversations that you continue to have. So on behalf of Ro and myself, thank you so much for taking your morning and spending it with us. Please feel free to reach out with any questions. I know somebody did ask the question if we would be sending the deck. The recorded session, a link to the recorded session will be sent out. And we just want to thank you and wish you many, many positive conversations moving forward.
Have a great day, everyone.